And by way of studies, what they do is they take people who are on a standard diet. Overnight, when they start the experimental protocol, they say to these people, right, stop doing that immediately, change your diet overnight, and what we're going to do, I'm going to feed you lots of meat. What happens is these people build up a high level of TMAO over a few weeks. Of course they do. And then they say, well, look, in a lab, if we expose these cells to TMAO, they go cancerous and stuff. So you shouldn't eat red meat and eggs. Case closed. Thank you very much. Everybody should go vegan now. Here's the problem. A person who is well adapted to a carnivore diet that doesn't contain plant materials, carbohydrates and stuff, they tend to develop a slightly different microbiome system. And there's another group of bacteria that develop, and that's another sort of bacteria that eats TMAO, producing completely innocuous products, thus keeping the TMAO level near zero. I see. You're a science denier, Edward. That's what it is. You're denying the science.
Denier.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
correct.
I've been accused of being a science denier myself a number of times, to which my response is this: listen, I'm not denying the science, I'm fucking insisting upon science. Substitute incidence for the word risk inappropriately, and before we actually talk about risk from incidence, let's adjust what the incidence was to something else. Me, are you joking? Example, the Seventh-day Adventist health study number 2, where they looked at the incidence of death from all causes versus the intake of meat. The adjustments they have applied to their data set on the basis of multiple variate regression have turned that data set 180 degrees on its ass. And they are literally suggesting, there you go, literally, they are suggesting that vegans died less often than meat eaters, and the more meat you ate, the more likely you were to die. The exact opposite was true in the data set that those authors collected. Okay, analogy, fire. To have a fire, you need 3 ingredients: heat, oxygen, and a fuel source. Remove any one of those 3, the fire will not work. It will fail. It goes out. Immune dysfunction is the fire. Inflammation is heat in that analogy. Remove the inflammation, you cannot have the immune dysfunction. The only way you can sell a vegan ideology to people is theology, because there is absolutely no science to underpin their ridiculous theological belief in eating plants and not eating animals. You want to tell me what's likely to happen to me over the next 4 decades? You show me a study where they kept people locked in labs for 4 decades, controlling everything. Otherwise, right off. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, super intelligent shades of the color sky blue pink, you're all welcome here, however you may identify. I identify as mostly wearing this yellow top today, and Ted, wherever he might be, he was here before. He identifies as a small yellow teddy bear who is in training for camouflage, and he's not been seen for a while. Stephen.
Sir. Yes. So, hello. Thanks for having me again, guys. For the audience joining us, the temperature of the water, so to speak, idea behind today is a bit of a roundtable discussion. So we're going to shoot some ideas off, maybe point some questions to Professor K, as well as Eddie, see where it goes. Now, we hope that you guys enjoy the conversation. So that's it. For the first question that I do have that I've been looking into is around the proposed mechanisms behind TMAO and cancer. The theory, as it's been given to us, if we will, is that this is in relation to charred meat, correct, Bart?
TMAO is a metabolite, so we're told, of meat, charred or otherwise, actually. And we're told that mostly it comes from, red meat and eggs, conveniently, because those are the things that the people that promote this ideology are against. And we're talking about the high priests of the Church of Anorexia Vegana, such as Joel the Con Man Khan, who paints himself out as a world expert in TMAO, he says, despite the fact that he has failed completely to understand the thing at all. Let me explain. TMAO is a metabolite that is produced in the gut. It's called trimethylamine oxide. What happens is your body creates TMA, which is trimethylamine, and that's used as a fuel source by a certain group of bacteria that live in our colons, and they say, oh, yum, 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 we'll eat this TMA, but produce TMAO. And this TMAO is supposed to be involved in inflammation, carcinogenesis, all this kind of nonsense. And by way of studies, what they do is they take people who are on a standard diet, and they overnight, when they start the protocol, the experimental protocol, they say to these people who've been eating a standard diet, right, stop doing that immediately. Change your diet overnight, and what we're going to do is we're going to take out all the plants and all the carbohydrates and stuff, and we're going to feed you lots of meat. To which, what happens is, these people build up a high level of TMAO over a few weeks. Of course they do. And then they say, well, look, in a lab, if we expose these cells to TMAO, they go cancerous and stuff. So you shouldn't eat red meat and eggs. Case closed. Thank you very much. Everybody should go vegan now. Because TMAO. Here's the problem. A person who is well adapted to a carnivore diet that doesn't contain plant materials, carbohydrates and stuff, they tend to develop a slightly different microbiome system to what you find in these standard diet eaters. And there's another group of bacteria that develop and are cultivated in those people's colons. And that's another sort of bacteria that eats TMAO, producing completely innocuous products as a result, thus keeping the TMAO level in the carnivore adapted person near zero. Basically. Yep. That's a technical term. Yeah. You can use that.
I'm going to write that down. Fuck.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll
right.
Oh. That's it. Yes. Go to fuck. Go directly to fuck. Do not pass go or collect $200.
Another one I wanted to bring up to you, Bart, was what is TMAO's relationship to mTOR? Now, that's a different pathway, correct?
So protein's relationship to mTOR, did you say?
No. Yeah. So mTOR, so I'm told, is another pathway that's supposed to be carcinogenic from
okay.
Yeah. And can you explain to me, the layperson, the mechanism by which this is supposed to happen? How does this one happen? Because out of TMAO, this is another big one that I get.
Right. So we're told that eating meat upregulates this process called mTOR, that mTOR is a carcinogen or a potential carcinogenic pathway, whatever, to which my very first reaction is, well, let's apply some basic common sense before we even look at the science. Okay. mTOR is pathway which has evolved in us and exists in us, such an evolutionary process having extended for, well, I think probably about as long as the universe has been around. Because if you think life suddenly sprung into existence from nothingness here on this planet 4,000 million years ago, give or take, then I think you've been smoking too much weed. Or something like that. I think DNA was delivered here on a rock from somewhere else, and I think that DNA been around for vastly longer than what we think. Let's say it's about the age of the universe, which may or may not be 13.8 thousand million years, because there's this new telescope thing now called the James Webb, which says, whoops, we got that wrong too. Looks like it might be twice as old as that, actually. Anyway, let's say it's a long time. A long, long time that this thing has evolved. This is a piece or a series of pieces of DNA that encode for the proteins that make up the structures, that the machinery that does this mTOR. They are there because they've survived negative and positive selection pressures. mTOR happens for a reason. It has a role to play in the overall integrated holistic physiology of a human.
Yeah.
So why the hell would we evolve a system that will cause us become metabolically disordered to the point of carcinogenesis?
Not only that, but you'd like to think that if this was an issue, then we would see that borne out in these observational studies, and we don't see.
Outstanding. So that's the very next point. Exactly that. Right. Yeah. Okay. So, all right, we've got this theory. It's bad for us. Eating meat is bad. Okay. Don't eat meat. Okay. Meat's bad. Well, let's have a look at what happens in populations of people who eat a lot of meat versus people who eat less meat. And cancer. Is there an obvious, clear, and unmistakable increase in the incidence of cancer in people who eat a lot of meat and nothing else is different? Well, the answer is we don't have that data. It doesn't exist because there are no studies where they've kept people locked in labs for 40 years to see how many of them get cancer. Ethics committees don't like that sort of thing at all. However, if there was a really obvious relationship, we'd see it.
Yeah.
It would be really obvious.
You'd see it, yeah.
Like, okay, if I said to you, is there clear indication in incidence data that we can look at that people who smoke cigarettes, tobacco, do they get more lung cancer than people who don't? Now, nobody in their right mind is going to say no, because we know they do get more cancer, 11,800% relatively. actually, per pack year of smoking. Is that a cause and effect data set? No, but it's a pretty convincing, we would see it if the same was true cancer and mTOR. Do we see that? No. Okay, we're done.
If I could comment on the mTOR thing real quick, by the way.
Yeah, please do.
Sure. The fear around mTOR is the fear around, I believe, excess cell proliferation. It's involved in like the muscle building process, and if you have too much of it, the claim is that it'll cause inflammation. And we all know chronic systemic inflammation is a problem. However, it ties directly into this talk about IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, which stimulates mTOR. So it actually is derived from that talking point, IGF-1. Dr. Gundry talks about this. Dr. Stephen Gundry, he's a huge fanatic when it comes to IGF-1, as well as Neu5Gc. But
we can cover that too if you like.
That later. Yeah. What he likes to say is that people that eat more animal protein exhibit higher IGF-1. Now, first of all, association. Yeah. Okay. Who cares? But let's say that was a causal relationship between a certain population that eats more meat, but also they eating. Because here's why I say that. Here's why I ask that. IGF-1 and insulin function and operate in synchronicity, in lockstep. If insulin goes up, IGF-1 goes up. If insulin goes down, then IGF-1 goes down. Insulin is what stimulates IGF-1. What stimulates insulin? More than anything else. Yeah, exactly.
Good. You've got the answer? Good, because the rest of us are struggling.
Yeah.
Good.
So I think the myth stems from this fact that, yes, when you increase animal protein, if you're consuming carbohydrates, sure, you might exhibit higher IGF-1 and insulin, because if they had heard of the Randall cycle, that would give them some clues as to why that may be the case. Or if they just understood the insulinogenic effects of protein, then it would make sense to them. But instead, what they do is they just say, oh, well, animal protein goes up, IGF-1 goes up, and that's a marker for disease because we said it is, and therefore meat is bad. And that's what they say. And that is the pattern you're going to see throughout science when you look at it.
Yes, in terms of reductionism.
It is, yeah. It's rampant. Even the colorectal stuff. If you look at the observational stuff that covers like our country, the United States, you'll find that there is it's a 17% relative risk increase, which is like an absolute risk of like what, 2% or something, Bart. I think it's something really small, basically nothing. But then if you look at the observational research that's in Asian countries, you'll find no connection to eating and colorectal cancer whatsoever. But then if you come back and look at the Asian population here in the United States, you'll find that it's higher here. Well, what's the difference? It's standard American junk is the difference.
Yeah.
And
inflammation.
And every time you apply, exactly. If you apply even the slightest little bit of logic to this, after one layer, it will start to fall apart all over the place. And the people that are left that purport this stuff are dangerous. They're dangerous. And me and Eddie run into them all the time. I mean, it's a TikTok war all day, every day. It's Instagram here. It's TikTok.
Really? I've never met anyone that's disagreed with me, Stephen.
Yeah, my goodness.
Who are these people that are disagreeing with you? Doesn't happen. Goodness.
And they cling to this.
Yeah.
It's their Bible. It's like, you guys, this is not science. A lot of these people, I've noticed that, I've offered debates, discussions with people to have, and they shy away. As soon as, I think it's because secretly they understand that this is big time flawed and it's going to get flamethrowed as soon as they put it in front of me or Eddie. I mean, if you're correct in what you have to say, then your idea should stand on their own merits and you should be able, to be honest, your ideas should defend themselves, and they don't.
That's right.
I've had to deal with this already. I've already had to deal with this with a few people that I say, okay, well, I mean, instead of having this comment dispute, let's go on camera and talk about it. It doesn't have to be, here's the thing, it doesn't have to be a vitriolic sort of acrid conversation. Just have a conversation with me and they won't do it. But I understand why they won't do it. We all understand why they won't do it. They do too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And all we can do is point to the fact that they won't front up and do it.
Yep.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there you go. At the end of the day, look, if X causes Y, then we should be able to look at someone's X without knowing their Y and predict absolutely what their Y is going to be reliably.
Yeah.
Do we see that in terms of colorectal cancer and meat consumption? No. Do we see that in terms of any aspect of human nutrition and any hard health outcome in human beings over any period of time whatsoever? The answer is no. So what we're talking about is statistically detectable minor differences between subgroups of people who are not even controlled or observed appropriately as would be required by the scientific discipline.
We're done right there.
Theology.
That's the end of it.
That is the
end of it.
It's not just
the end of it. And
it's not, unfortunately, because people still want to bang this Bible.
Right. I just wanted to say it's not even simply theology. It is theology, but it's also bread and circuses. That's what I refer to it as all the time.
Absolutely, yes.
Because it's just you conducting studies and showing, oh, well, like you said, there's a small statistical significance here. But I think the problem is that the use of the words risk and causes this. And
go.
All
that way. Go.
the words like that are used, I think, sure, it's some of it is because people have been taught that that's appropriate to use. I'm sure that that's the case. However, I think it's also because we as humans don't like ambiguity. We want to just pin down things and say this causes this, absolutely, because we like order. We don't like chaos. We don't like saying things like we don't know this. And so therefore, what you do is you find this and you find any excuse to say, naturally, this increases your risk of this by this percent. Right. That's what I see all the time. It's like, well, no, you can't say that though. It's not like we're insulting your intelligence, or sometimes it's not the case. But
sometimes you fucking deserve it.
Yeah. But it's more so saying you should be okay. You should feel okay with saying you don't know. Okay, just say that you don't know. That's it. But instead, people's ideologies get to them and they don't want to say it because then they can't hammer down their ideology into a bunch of people.
I see. You're a science denier, Edward. That's what it is. You're denying the science.
Correct.
Yeah, yes, correct. I've been accused of being a science denier myself a number of times, to which my response is this. Listen, I'm not denying the science. I'm fucking insisting upon science. And what you're trying to offer up here, that is not science. It's theology. Science is experimental, observed, and controlled.
It's not about trying to figure out what's happening across populations and drawing causal inference from it. That's not what it's about.
That's exactly.
Science is a discipline. It's under control. It's under observation. It's under that. That's why words like cause, effect, evidence, hazard, risk, those things are all so important in that world.
Yeah.
Because in order to use them, they require an extraordinary level of discipline. And the people that are using those words in the arena in which they're choosing to use them, there's no control, there's no discipline, and there's no discipline from them either to refrain from using them, not noticing or being cognizant of the fact that you are causing harm to people because they don't know any better. And that is wrong on every single imaginable level. It's inhumane and incorrect on every level imaginable.
Right. Exactly.
Let's
put some flesh on that skeleton a bit. Let's use an example so that hopefully it can crystallize in people's brains even more. Just purely for fun, let's use Edward because he's the youngest one here. What's your tender young age, young man?
I'm 20.
Right. Okay. If I say to you that the studies absolutely show that your risk of an adverse cardiovascular event is reduced 20% by taking this drug, based on a study that I'm going to put up in front of you for 3 seconds on the screen. Look, there it is. There it is in the title, 20% reduced risk by taking this drug for cardiovascular events. Now I can say, Edward, your risk is 20% reduced if you take this drug now. What's your first question? Okay, great. Who were the people that were studied in the study that you're talking about?
What was the demographic?
Well, they were men over 60. All right. Let's pop directly back to fuck then, shall we? Without passing go.
20.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and a lot of times, Bart, in these types of studies, they're usually an age population and they do tend to swing heavily male, right?
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
Eddie, I know you had a question. Go ahead.
No, I was actually going to say, when you look in, like, it's super, you have to be extremely granular, because when you're looking at different populations, then you have to take into consideration, there's this thing called the Simpsons paradox. So you can see this whole sprawled out set of data points on a graph that shows no association. But then if you separate the genders, you can see an association between, you can see an association in the female population and the male population and all that stuff. It's just, there's so many things to consider that they don't consider when they say that stuff. That's what I wanted to say, because you just mentioned that if something swings heavily male, it can disrupt,
you can't apply that to females because it's a male study, right? Also, if your study participants are men over 60, there's no point talking to a 20-year-old man about his risk being proved by a study of people who were not representative of him whatsoever. And thirdly, this use of this word risk based on associations. Number one, the associations that they're reporting are adjusted, so you can read fabricated. They're made up data sets. They're not what was actually observed. So there you go. And the word risk absolutely demands that there is a mechanism that you can point to. Now, I can say, if I step off a platform that's 100 meters in the air and there's nothing below me except the ground, my risk of death is probably about 100% of doing that, assuming I have no parachute or any way of breaking that fall. What is the mechanism of the death? Well, it's the ground coming up to meet me very, very fast indeed. We know the mechanism. There's no question about it. That's a fair statement on risk.
Right.
Because we've controlled everything else, haven't we, basically?
Yeah.
Right. Now, if I say, right, the platform I'm standing on is not taking statins, or the platform is the statins, shall we say, and stepping off that platform, not taking the statins, advances my risk of dying. Great. What's the mechanism? What is it? Or do we just have an association that happens in one thing correlates with another? Are there any compounds, covariates, collinearities that might be the actual underpinning cause of any incidence difference that we might observe if we bothered to actually report what we'd observed instead of adjusting it first to suit the needs of our funding source? This is some great sciencing that's being done, isn't it? It's awesome.
The funny thing is it's not a joke because that's how it's done.
Yeah. So let's substitute incidence for the word risk inappropriately. And before we actually talk about risk from incidence, let's adjust what the incidence was to something else. Fuck me. Are you joking?
Deflate the power of the result, and in many cases change it entirely to something exactly diametrically opposed to what you observed in the population.
Example, the Seventh-day Adventist health study number 2, where they looked at the incidence, we're told, of death from various sub-causes and from all causes versus the intake of meat in 5 quartiles. A 0th, vegans, a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quartile of meat consumption in a Seventh-day Adventist population. So first of all, is that applicable to people who do not follow that theology and lifestyle? No. Secondly, how old were these people? They were aged at the beginning. So is it to younger people? No. Was there an even split of males and females? No. So, whatever. Real problems with that. Anyway, here's what the Seventh-day Adventist study number 2 reported. It said that the lowest incidence of death from all causes the lowest risk, they said, the lowest risk of death from all causes and from every sub-cause was lowest in the vegan population and progressively higher in every quartile of meat consumption, to the point where the people who ate the most meat had the highest risk of death from heart attacks, cancer, everything else as well, and all causes put together, including being mowed down by a bus. That's what the study reported, to the point where the difference in risk was, if the vegans were used as the referent, the 1.0 risk ratio, what they said was the people who ate the most meat, the top quartile, were 30-something% more likely to die, is what they said. Until you look at the raw data, the incidence of death from all causes and from every sub-cause that was actually observed in those populations by those authors. The adjustments they have applied to their data set on the basis of multiple variate regression have turned that data set 180 degrees on its ass. Because what was observed was that the most death occurred in the vegans. The second most, of course they didn't, because those authors came from the Church of Loma Linda, and they were studying at the University of Loma Linda.
You'd think that would convince them right then and there, like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
No, because the good book, their good book, says don't eat meat for some reason. Yeah. But what the point here is that this data set that they actually collected and should have reported, or they reported that they took this trend and they twisted it 180 degrees on its ass by adjusting it to something different from what it was in the first place. And they are literally suggesting, there you go, literally, they are suggesting that vegans died less often than meat eaters, and the more meat you ate, the more likely you were to die. The exact opposite was true in the data set that those authors collected. Stunning.
Yeah.
That's some fantastic sciencing.
That's what we call chicanery and sophistry. That's what that is. It's a bunch of pseudo-sophisticating in order to bolster your beliefs.
Yes.
Support them. Anyway.
Cool.
I actually wonder. Yeah, so I have one main one here actually. I wanted to get your take, Bart, on autoimmune diseases. Now it's often stated, even within the name, that the body is attacking itself in an autoimmune scenario.
Yeah.
However, do you think that is the case, or do you think it is, at least most of the time, the case that the body is attacking something, but not itself directly? It's simply the case that the body is bearing the brunt of the attack, either through a shrapnel scenario, so to speak, or through some sort of molecular mimicry scenario, for example, like lectins, as one example. What do you think about that?
I think it's very, very difficult, without being a reductionist, to draw an accurate picture of what human physiology is about, what it does and why it does it. There are so many grey areas, most of our knowledge, our absolute knowledge about physiology is based on models which may or may not actually accurately reflect the objective reality in which a person will find themselves at a given time. One thing that we can say for absolute certain, it seems, is that the most common, if not ubiquitous, thing that underlies any of these disorders variously is a period of chronic systemic inflammation. Inflammation seems to be the thing that sets off this aberrant process, whatever the aberrant process may be. You think about it as the body attacking itself, or whether you think about it as purely an inappropriate activation of a system that's designed to take care of invading pathogens, for example, but instead locks onto a native protein as being the problem when really it wasn't. Something has to activate that system and make that linkage. And it seems to me, in my experience thus far, that pretty much every time you look at one of these people, you've got a chronic systemic inflammation problem.
Yeah.
You deal with the inflammation problem and the autoimmune problem evaporates over time. Stephen, go.
Sorry, I've dealt with it a little bit in my coaching practices. It generally, from what I understand, what I've read, it seems to affect women more than men, and it seems to come in twos. From what I understand, a lot of your immune system's in your gut, which is actually an exterior organ, right? Bart, get your mouth open.
Yeah.
The way I understood it was when you put something in your stomach that's, not supposed to be there, plant materials, grains, stuff like that, it's an insult to it. And eventually that chronic issue manifests itself as an autoimmune issue somewhere else in the body, whether that be eczema, whether that be psoriasis. That was the way it was explained to me several years ago. I don't know exactly how accurate it was, but it stuck with me. My wife actually had to eczema and psoriasis, and she cured them both with a carnivorous approach. It definitely it's an insult. It's an inflammatory issue without a doubt. Like that's what it is. But yeah, that's what I've got on it. That's what I remember. Go ahead and expand on it, Eddie, if you want.
No, that's exactly what I think as well. I asked the question because that's what I thought about. When you look at autoimmune, I know it's hard to sort of, when you look at a disorder or something, it's hard to tell whether the inflammation came first or if the condition caused the inflammation, and then it's just this feedback loop, right? But what you do see is when you look at things that have been shown to absolutely be able to induce inflammation, and then those very things not being required for the subservience of a human life, and you eliminate those, the inflammation and the condition seem to dissipate.
Yep. Exactly.
So that's what, and then that's where we infer this conclusion from.
Yeah. Okay. Analogy: fire. To have a fire, you need 3 ingredients: heat, oxygen, and a fuel source. Remove any one of those 3, the fire will not work. It will fail. It goes out. You can't have a fire without heat, oxygen, and a fuel source. Immune dysfunction, the fire. Inflammation is heat in that analogy. Remove the inflammation, you cannot have the immune dysfunction. It evaporates. It stops. The fire goes out. The heat, the cause of the fire? Probably not, but who cares? We've taken care of it.
Correct.
There you go. That's the way I look at it.
All right, Bart, I've got myself and Eddie were going over, he was sending me some of the stuff on the stable isotopes, and I was reading about humans, our evolutionary history, looking at positive, negative selection pressures and how that relates across different species, including humans. And it's led me to this theory, and I was kind of discussing it, shooting it back and forth with Eddie, wanted to see what your thoughts on it were. So it was around 10 to 12,000 years ago that the agrarian revolution started, and that was going to be dependent upon where you were in the world. As I understand it, that was probably the worst thing that's happened to human health. Second worst thing, second to seed oils, I'd say, that's ever happened to human health. And in the way that negative selection pressures work, do you think there's any subset population of people who are more advanced, so to speak, in the dealing with the insult that is grains and plant material relative to other people in the world. Like perhaps people in Iceland don't have any sort of defense mechanism. People in Europe, where the agrarian revolution was bigger and stronger, and did they have more of it? Can we expect a time in the future when humans will develop a more robust defense to these things? How long will it take? What do you think?
Yep, I think that populations of people will experience genetic drift to some degree on the basis of the environment in which that gene set or those gene sets are placed, and a population of people who have, for example, been doing something by way of their everyday lives for 10,000 years are going to have some degree of adaptation to that, and ergo will do better doing that than a population of folks who are no good in that regard. Example, don't invite a bunch of Inuit come to your house for a meal and them grains and porridge, because that's not going to end well. Don't do that with anybody, because it's not going to end well either way, but it will end less nastily for those people who've been doing some of that than the Inuit, for example, who haven't. Yes, I do think there is that.
Or don't invite the Inuit to your fasting protocol for the next 3 days.
No, don't do that either. Don't do that, because Inuit they can't fast so much at all. That's because of that genetic situation that the Inuit have got, which seems to be an adaptation to cold, potentially, and to a diet which is very, very high in omega-3 oils, rather than actually anything to do with the fact that it knocks down ketogenesis. That's the theory on it anyway.
They have another knockout or a specific adaptation to ketones as well, right? Isn't there something?
Yeah, they have this adaptation to the CPT1A transporter specifically localized to their livers, whereby in the fed state, their livers will oxidize vastly more fatty acid than yours or mine will. And in the fed state, I should say, and in the fasted state, the opposite is true. Their fatty acid oxidation drops right down. Through a convoluted process of things, the take home of that is that these individuals are vastly less likely to have ketones floating around than a westernized person. Now, the original thought was, well, that's an adaptation to ketogenesis being bad. Okay? Ketones are bad. Okay? So these people that live in a situation and eat a diet that would be highly ketogenic for anybody else, not so much for them. Ketogenesis is bad, and there's the proof. You fucking idiots. No, an adaptation to cold and a diet which is very, very high in omega-3, it seems, and nothing to do with the ketones per se. These people are more able to supply energy to their tissues that need it in the form of glucose than westernized people, precisely because they're very much glucose sparing through this convoluted mechanism that we won't go into today.
Do you suppose that Joey Schwartz's little psycho friend that was throwing rocks all around has got this figured out yet?
I don't think that particular individual would know the difference between his elbow and his asshole if I labeled both of those and taught him how to read.
He was just a dude.
He was fun though, wasn't he? He was great.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, I couldn't. Yeah, that was I learned a lot in that episode actually from you though. Yeah, Eddie, what else did you have?
Oh, well, with respect to the fatty acid oxidation thing, I was actually going to ask Bart again. I asked him yesterday. We had a call yesterday about the CPT1A situation, and I wanted to get more details on that because I hadn't personally looked into it. But I think he pretty much covered that one. I guess I can bounce off of that. Why would it be the case? I know that we're not going to get into the specific convoluted mechanisms of it. I don't think that would be a good idea because Stephen has more questions. But
I'll be lost anyway.
I was wondering the theory, you just said that the theory is that they were eating more omega-3 oils or at least things that were rich in that. And that was a theory as to why that adaptation occurred. Why do you think that would be the case? What else does the theory say as to why that is the case?
Right.
Because I don't see how that relates to ketones and glucose at all, but maybe I will after it's explained to me.
Right. Well, after our discussion yesterday, I looked into the paper, the classic paper again, that outlined all of this stuff to try and tease it out, knowing full well that you had asked me that this morning. And I have to tell you, the paper is written really poorly. Incredibly poorly. And it's very, very difficult to actually tease out what they are actually implying and what the mechanism of it is. All of these things are presented as alternate hypotheses that with plus or minus what looks to me like an actual good mechanistic explanation or not. And the thing around the omega-3 intakes being much higher in these people was quite apocryphal. And I'm a well-trained physiologist that understands biochemistry. And that paragraph about that looked to me like, what's this? What are they even saying? What are they talking? These are words. These authors wrote words on the page. So the short answer is I really don't know exactly what the mechanism they're implying there is. They're saying, well, this particular setup would be detrimental in a population of people not eating a lot of omega-3, but these guys do eat a lot of omega-3, so it's fine. Seem to be along those lines. The exact mechanism, still fumbling around a bit to try and find. And Ted, useless as a chocolate teapot, he couldn't help at all. Just said, "Are you retarded?" But that really didn't help, because I felt a bit that way having read that. As a trained scientist, having read that paragraph and going, okay, what the fuck have you guys been smoking? Don't know. There you go. That's an example of when you don't know, saying, I don't know. Okay. Right. You won't be struck down with a bolt of lightning from the blue for saying, I don't know.
Instead of desperately scrounging for some words to put in the paper. Yeah. Yep. The only other note before Stephen gets to his next question, because I want to get through this, but there was something I wanted to bounce off of what you had said as well. Whenever you're talking about, certain selection pressures causing people to be able to most likely withstand more of a toxin load, let's say, from plants based on their environment at the time in terms of their evolution and their ancestral past. I wanted to put this out there, though. We tend to think that our ability, like carbohydrates are toxic. We know that, exogenously speaking, all of them are. Sorbitol, fructose, sucrose, all that. However, I think we underestimate the fact that it's actually a pretty good thing that the human body can subsist off of carbohydrates in the absence of fat and protein, because it ties right into that. Because I was going to say that the agrarian revolution, depending on your perspective, was a really bad thing. And I wrote about this in my book, Plug. No, I'm just saying. I wrote about it.
Contraindicated by Edward Goeki or Goek. What is it? You keep telling me. I keep forgetting. How do I pronounce your surname?
Goeki.
Goeki. Yes. There you go.
Double back. I just finished it, and to the audience listening, if you are interested in reading that book, is fantastic. Well written. If you're not an expert in these subjects, it's easy to understand. 100%, go get it.
Right. Contraindicated by Edward Goeki.
Thanks. Thanks for that.
Go get it.
But I had said in there that depending on your perspective, it was a really good thing back then, because the theory is that the extinction of the megafauna occurred around that time, 40,000 to 50,000 years ago, and then slowly afterwards you see this increase in the agricultural movement. We just sort of sum it up and say it happened around 13,000 years ago or whatever. It doesn't really matter when, but it was really recent, and it was a good thing back then. Long shelf life for things like beans and grains, shelf life, so to speak. So we could subsist off of those, and then as we began to continue migrating out, it seems to be the case that some subpopulations continued eating more of those foods and subsisting off of them as compared to others. And so, yes, that theory I think does hold up, especially. But it was a good thing back then. It's a bad thing now, really, because we don't need that anymore. We've domesticated animals to the point of pretty plenty and available. So anyway, that was just my 2 cents that I want to put in there.
Excellent.
I guess I only had one left for you, Bart. I wanted you to, if you can, explain some of the mechanisms of autophagy.
The best way to describe autophagy, I think, as a concept is to break down the word autophagy, which means self-eating. Generally, autophagy is the process by which various scavenger cells in our body that are programmed to do this job will bop around and find the cells or cell components or cell remnants or bits and bobs around the body that are really pretty much beyond repair and just need to be gobbled up and recycled if they can be, or eliminated if they can't be. That's what these kind of cells do. They run around and they go nom, 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 and they eat up all this nonsense and clear things out and get you reset for the reuse of those materials that you can reuse and the elimination of those that you can't. Think of it as a clean up, tidy up, sort your shit away, get things squared away process, pretty much. So the actual process is these cells that are self-eating, the self-eating cells, the autophagy cells, is they will actually engulf the thing that they're dealing with and internalize using invaginations. on the cell membrane. That's a good word, isn't it? Invagination.
It is.
And they will basically, absorb the stuff, and then they will put it into a cell organelle, which is designed to basically pour acid all over the stuff and break it all down to its components so that we can then stack those up and reuse them and get rid of the shit that's no good anymore. Pretty simple.
Simple stuff. Bart, that's all I've got. 45 minutes on the dot.
Beautiful.
If I could say one more thing.
No more things. No, just strictly limited to things you can say. Come on. All right then. Hang on.
Yeah.
I've actually, yeah.
Well, one thing that I wanted to say is, since autophagy, anytime that you hear about something being some phenomenon in the body that involves the breaking down of something else, you can think immediately catabolism, because that's by definition what that is. And if you think of catabolism, what is required for catabolism in the body is not only low insulin, but higher glucagon. And so a good diet to adopt, if you're wanting to increase autophagy activity in your body, is one that doesn't markedly stimulate your insulin, and one that doesn't stimulate insulin as often as a diet that, well, is most colloquially adopted, let's say, more ubiquitous, such as the standard American diet, and one that's rich in carbohydrates. There's a lot of people saying, well, this will increase autophagy activity, and this will, all that, without trying to effectuate something in the body by addition instead of subtraction, which is lowering insulin, not adding in a bunch of stuff that can maybe, because again, we just talked about the science behind this stuff. It's all maybes that can maybe increase your autophagy rate in your body or something like that. Whatever that's measured by. But anyway.
How did you stumble on the Randall cycle? How did you happen to find it?
It was referred to in a kind of, by the way, thing as hey, this thing exists and it's interesting, but not really anything conclusive. It's a possibility that it contributes to this, that, or the other thing. And I thought, what the hell's that? I've spent decades studying metabolism at that stage. Yeah. So why haven't I heard about this thing? Well, I'm going to look this thing up. So Philip Randall, was it? Right. Well, fuck me. Look at this. Isn't that incredible? And then I sort of made some videos about it and said some things about it. And then some absolute fuckpots, some asshats with, a few years experience maybe in looking at metabolism, who have bought into the school of Pete Tardery.
Rapetian.
Yeah. Rapetians, Petards, one of whom is a nurse, for God's sake. Nothing wrong with being a nurse. It's a fine profession to be a nurse, but nurses are not experts in metabolism, are they? I think you'll find the people who are expert in metabolism are people like myself who are, in fact, expert in metabolism. What do you say? Anyway, him and his little mate, who both of whom are in their mid-20s, I would suspect, and is beta as fuck, made a bunch of videos where they've looked in a reductionist way at some stuff well downstream of where the actual Randall cycle works, and say, well, look, here's the actual mechanism of it. And they're talking about electron transport chain stuff and TCA cycle stuff as being, the issues and the problems, etc. Except neither one of them understands the TCA bicycle, because it's not a cycle, it's a bicycle. It's two half cycles. And in not understanding that, they don't understand how it is that what they're saying is theoretically fine, but in reality fundamentally incorrect. And it's as funny as hell, but that's a story for another day. It's just on an hour, so that's probably a perfect time frame to say thank you very much for your divided attention, class. There will be a test on all this material at the end of semester, so make sure you take very, very good notes, including there will be a question on my theory about brontosauri.
Interesting.
And here it is. All brontosauri were very, very robust in the middle and much, much thinner at either end. Prove me wrong, fuckers. See you next time. Ciao for now.